every time I take a break from this channel, it's not with any amount of laziness. And I think a lot of people deal with this too, but they attribute it to laziness. I have these spells where I don't feel compelled to sit down and talk in front of a camera because, quite frankly, what is the use? And it's not in this nihilistic sense. It's more so with an idea that, depending on whatever it is I'm thinking about, I know that I'm not equipped or of a certain status where any insight I can provide would be worthwhile of someone's time. It would be needlessly speculative and probably better answered in some academic paper that would have got published if there was any funding left. I've always had this compass to me, and it has made being on the internet increasingly frustrating over the last few years. I grew up being on the internet, and I found a lot of I found it as a comfortable refuge when I couldn't like engage with people on ways that I wanted to, or like just having an outlet of an accessibility to people who might be not necessarily more of my own ilk, because I don't believe that you need to be inside of this homogenized unit, but just the internet felt like a technology that gave the opportunity for me to connect with people who I could function with. And maybe in the early days where I was still really young, so I can't go certain places or meet certain people or do certain things, because you have to be an adult. You have to be, of a certain age to actually go out into the world and start actualizing these fantasies or dreams that you are forced to just humor inside of your little teenage space, because you're incubating at that point. You're trying to prepare yourself for finally leaving the nest. And at least, in the 2010s of the internet, as things were getting more commercialized, I felt like there was still opportunity for that. I was able to start connecting with, some comedians and things like that. And I found a lot of reward in that, because that was the first pursuit that really grabbed me at all. Well, after, I decided that banking probably wasn't my passion, comedy was the thing that made the next most sense. And so the internet always felt like this vessel that could help carry you to a certain place. YouTube, as an example, is this platform where the gatekeepers are all of a sudden gone. You don't have to try and network with certain people, just have an opportunity to get access to a camera that then has the opportunity to get access to a distribution feed where people then can watch certain things. You had the chance to kind of build your own artifice and your own structure that other people can, give you feedback on, and you can have the opportunity to try and go in the direction you've always wanted to without the hassle of all of these other people telling you no. But sometimes, and this is the lesson that I've held on to since I was really young, sometimes no is probably the best thing that can happen to you. I've had so many different opportunities, outside of the internet, but just in the real world and inside of my professional career, where a no or a rejection was incredibly debilitating and frustrating and caused some existential question, depending just within the pursuit of what I was doing. But in some ways, because that door shut, I was able to take a better door to where, in some ways, to where I wanted to go. And I think just that principle, it works in careers, but I think it works with ideas as well. And where this comes back to the internet is inside of this digital world now, which I'm only just realizing the extent to which my real life is in the digital plane. I don't really exist in some ways in my own physical body. Some things that have helped change that are, certain life events, bad things, but good things as well, that make you come to in some ways to remember, what this actual human experience is. And it's a moment for you to check in and kind of evaluate your values, your direction, your perspective, all of these necessary pieces of the foundation to keep you from going insane. I'd also say being in a relationship with another human person, at least one that you want to engage with, can cause you to have that reflection as well. Surely there are a lot of people who get into relationships purely for whatever physical benefit or pleasure they might provide, but it's a whole different experience when you're in a situation where you're trying to be human with this other person, and you're trying to figure out how you two can, move along in the same direction while, still being your fullest versions of yourself. There's a level of compassion required inside of that many people struggle to learn, for reasons that are not mine to care about or fix. That's yours. So fix it. But all of these have really made me reflect on how this place that's been so integral for my entire life, the internet, in some ways has become debilitating, and not just to me. When I was talking about how no is so beneficial in a lot of ways, I exercise that heavily in my own process. I even made a whole short that was about questioning whether we should really just enact on our impulses, or if there are consequences to them that are not worth taking, if we actually are these arbiters of these consequences, and if it's really anything that we can help or stop. When you create something, it is kind of it's supposed to be a Pandora's box in some way. You're presenting an idea, and once it's out into the world, you're hoping that it materializes into a beneficial thing. But more often than not, nowadays, there's not any amount of time to stick with anything. And the internet is somewhat to blame for this, in my opinion. Within just the last 5 or so years, and everyone else has noticed this too across the internet, but I'm using YouTube just as a microcosm to this point. You have this drive of people who have an entirely different definition of what success is. It's almost kind of cheesy to act like money and art are inherently antithetical, especially just given the types of personalities who tend to just wax about that. But at least in the system that we're functioning in currently, there is an inherent conflict between our artistic license and merit and trying to function purely within that, and money. Both are versions of success, but they yield markedly different results. Most people don't value the artistic license and merit and such because we all exist inside of this system where if your bank account is empty at the start of the month, someone comes knocking on your door and is ready to beat you up and kick you out. From which point, who knows what you get to do? You're in some ways no longer even a human. You become this animal inside of a society that wants to somehow keep you down, even though in many ways you are not solely in that position by your own actions. Your actions may contribute to it, but there are myriad factors that lend someone to befall into that position. And so then when you're inside of this artistic pursuit, you are in this constant struggle between maintaining your authenticity and trying to keep the lights on. YouTube especially, just given the power of the algorithm over the last few years, has catered mainly to the business savvy, people who practice either churning out as much as possible so that way you can keep the lights on, or focusing more on the sedative and anesthetizing, or in some ways just like the cheating, the cheat codes of presentation. And you see this especially a lot inside of short form content, where there's the artistry is, you could argue it's maybe there because there's an art to even making crap. It's a real beautiful thing. The human body could be like its own Charlie and the Chocolate Factory experience, where you get to watch all of the inner workings of the colon and stuff like that. There are so many moving parts that are disgusting and beautiful. That aside, the internet has increasingly catered to and promoted these people who care less about what it is they're putting out and more about just simply putting out. It matters more to make noise than it does to speak on something. You have pockets where this isn't true, and I'm also not trying to paint the entire internet as a bad thing now. You have people who, like me, are aware of the responsibility of platform and all these other facets that come with trying to build a community and a space on the internet. And so I'm not trying to say that this is all inherently bad and there's no one doing good things, but I do feel that the everyday person who might not have an audience, who might not have that type, who simply just logs on and consumes, there has to come a time where we culturally ask ourselves, what are we doing? It feels weird that we're in this almost Clockwork Orange situation where you have to watch things that you don't care about, are not good, purely because they are just there. Like it's this oddly nihilistic and defeatist mentality that it hurts everyone across the board. It hurts the people who are sitting to watch. It hurts the people who are making it because they're not spending their time on anything worthwhile. It in some ways hurts the trajectory in which the audience can go, because we live in a country now where the literacy rates are dropping so rapidly that you do have to question how sophisticatedly you can communicate inside of your art, because there is now quite literally a barrier of language inside of making things. And I grapple with this daily, aside from the other struggles of resources, of just the general obstacles that come with trying to get a film project off the ground, or even a short project. The best way that I can paint it in the context of me is I could be someone who decides to just put out once a week a sketch or anything like that, no matter what. But, and I had a whole video about this on my channel from a while ago. Why would I do that? For, like, if my goal inside of the internet space was to just push myself into an algorithm so that way I could just have an audience for whatever reason and then just keep churning out stuff, then maybe there's a value to trying to do something like that. But when I sit down with myself and I'm in this office alone with my own thoughts, I have absolutely no desire for that type of audience, under that type of pursuit either. The thing that has always driven me inside of any type of creative space is the playground, the abstract playground that you are wandering through, and you're trying to hone in on these immaterial things, either about yourself, about just living in the world, or things that are not kindly put to words, but you're trying to be that vehicle that can put lightning in the bottle and then show people it. That has always been what is more interesting to me. And I feel like that is what the artistic pursuit is supposed to be. I'm not lucky that I'm someone who can churn stuff like that out on a consistent basis. And that's been something that I've doubted myself on. It's been something where I've questioned many times, do I have the wrong attitude on this? Is there something inherently wrong with me here that I need to work on and change? And I'm not doubting that there's a possibility that I can amend certain things if my goal is to have art that I'm proud of showcased to people. But that type of attitude at the end of the day is not conducive to the internet space. It's conducive to a specific type of audience with a specific type of appreciation for a specific type of niche. And in understanding that, when you're also someone who is in somewhat of a state of survival, you have to start doing the cost calculus of, is my authenticity more worthwhile to me than keeping the lights on? And it's just, in many ways, it's a struggle that just robs you of your dignity and your humanity, and you're trying to walk that tightrope every single day while also acknowledging, just with general empathy, that you're not Job in this context. You are not being condemned to walk this line. That's just implicit to trying to build this thing in the specific way you want. If you want to go against the grain, then don't expect not to get scratched. But where the frustration also comes from too is this sense that the direction at which content is moving, audiences are moving, it also creates this sense of, are we, is the human that I know from 10 years ago, even 15 years ago, already obsolete? Am I coming of age and developing these specific skills at a point in time where the overall zeitgeist wants a movie to look less like a Kubrick film and more like a Mr. Beast YouTube video? And just this sense where what I find rewarding is contradictory to what people find appealing. And this is also a frustrating struggle back to the artistic license in business sense. Because the only reason why you think about that is because there is this, it's a constant voice in your head of, am I appealing not necessarily to the right people, but just, am I making this accessible, period? Because I don't think art is meant to purely exist for the self. I think it can purely exist for the self if you truly are not worried about anything else. But I like that itself that's a pedestal that few have the luxury, or the privilege is maybe the better word for it, of existing on. And so this is where I'm at currently. The internet is not your friend at this point. At least it's nice for me because I have people who I don't live around, and so I appreciate the technology in that sense. I appreciate the little pockets where I'm able to find things that are worthwhile to me. They inspire me and such, but the accessibility of those, not from like a literate sense, like me not being able to understand the content, but from an actual just discoverability sense, is becoming more and more difficult with time. And it just constantly begs a question of where do we go from here? Who is any of this for? What am I doing this for at this point? Why am I doing? And that's also why it just feels so disingenuous nowadays to exist in this sphere of content that is just about trying to hit certain data points and a certain frequency of things, but none of it is worth any substance. You're not watching something and gaining any insight into yourself or just anything of that nature. You're consuming content that exists just to exist, and it just places you from one point in time to a point in time later. And what happens in between is you just hit a couple of dopamine receptors and then at the end feel absolutely nothing different. And that, in my mind, is the worst experience for any type of content. But that is what functions best in a commercialized digital space. And so that's been really disheartening to just verbalize over the last few years. Many people have been talking about this stuff ad nauseum, and so I'm adding my name to that now. But it's entirely different when you recognize these trends occurring, and the main thing is to just not fall into despair of them happening, because I always feel in some ways you can pull it out of the fire, but it takes way more than one person to do that. And it takes a whole attitude that some days I think exists out there, some days I don't think exists out there. An attitude of people just wanting better for themselves. And at least in the current economic scheme of the world, in some ways that's asking for a lot. And so you're getting also this reflection in the art of just how absolutely vapid and lost this current generation of culture is. Not necessarily maybe by design in some contexts, but it's a reflection of struggle, but not in a way that feels worth watching. It's like when you watch your friend go on a Twitter rampage and you can tell that they need to take their meds. That's more so what it feels like watching the bulk of bad content hit the airwaves. It just feels like people are refusing to take their medicine, and so they're just dysfunctional in how they're putting things together, at least just in the overall piecing together of it. I don't want to assign that to some of because there are some great artists who even work at, the big networks and stuff like that, but they're stymied by the same obstacles that have existed since, the start of all of this. Certain producers have more say and they push things in a certain direction, and just all of the too many cooks type of situations unfolding in what you are seeing. A lot of different tangents as usual inside of this, but to get to the main point of it all, I wonder what the value of entertainment is, and I at least always try to practice that if I'm going out to entertain, it's not about me. I am just the person in the position trying to execute this thing that I feel is more important, and to a point that I'm so compelled to do it that I drop everything in my life and I spend every waking hour finding locations, all the logistical hassle of just making something happen. I put it all into that. And it's not to put my face out there. It's just to try and communicate this idea and hope that I can do so in a way that people find is worth their time, or at the very least they give respect that I tried to give them something that truly came from me and came from an honest place. I think that's really lost now inside of the current digital content sphere. It's, again, just about, do you have something you can sell versus do you have something interesting to say? When I first wanted to do anything creative, my dad told me this old joke of a kid who said he wants to be a writer, and then he says that to a writer, and the writer goes, "Oh, that's great. What do you have to say?" And the kid goes, "That I want to be a writer." And it's especially just like inside of the YouTube scene, as a main example, all the most popular things on there are not necessarily about anything worthwhile. It's about marketing at the end of the day. Both literally, you can find actual people inside of that genre, but also just in, the vlog sphere and stuff like that. Everything is about market. None of it is about trying to paint a certain type of picture, present a certain thing. Some people find ways to incorporate micro doses of that. I think of how everyone talks about Casey Neistat and how he cuts and presents things. There's a level to which people are exceptions to the rule. And so what I hope can come across from this long and winding monologue, if you made it this far, is for you to just at least think about what it is that you consume in the online spaces, because it's, at the end of the day, about how many eyeballs can watch this plane crash. It doesn't matter how awful it is, how grotesque it is, how traumatic of an event it is. If millions of people watch a plane crash happen, then more plane crashes are going to occur. And at least for me, I don't find that to be a rewarding cultural space. And so you have to then act accordingly inside of the digital front. You have to be mindful of what you're clicking on, of what you're spending your time on, because that's what the algorithm is going to take as worthwhile. And that's how you do it as an inside job. It just in how the system is, but otherwise, just I don't know. I I'll continue to practice this caution and credence, because if I work on something, I want it to really be worth people's attention. There's so much that already exists out there by people who are smarter than me, who have more experience on things, and they can contextualize and add better perspective than I can on just certain ideas that, I don't want to run over them. I don't want to act like I am breaking ground on stolen land, especially in today's political climate. That's I think people are aware is the main point. People are aware of when these things happen, but at least in an artistic sense, we're not. We feel that the wheel gets reinvented time and time again, and then you have these heroes of form who just they degrade away into dust, and everything that they worked so hard on is now worthless and useless, and now it feels inhumane in some way, just to the overall scope of being human, for certain great things to not even be acknowledged or cared for. And I'm thinking of this mostly in a cinema context of like people who may have never watched a black and white film or anything like that. Just a lack of appreciation for how we got to this point in time. It's like it's like those sitcom episodes where the teenager is annoyed to be learning about how his grandparents came over and went through Ellis Island, and just like, this is dumb. It's stupid, because they want to go skateboard because that's how a sitcom presents things. And you learn the lesson of, no, it's as interesting and as profound as this current moment is, you are not unique in your lived experience, at least in just the general context. You could be the only person who's ever been stabbed by a monkey, but if you look at that from a broader point of view, it's like that there is an act of betrayal happening upon you. It might be unique in the exact in the literal happening of the events, but you are not the only one who has experienced the emotional turmoil of, in this context, being stabbed by a monkey. Anyway, I hope through all of this, maybe I said something that was interesting. I at the very least am happy to try and get back into the swing of putting these thoughts back together. In some ways, it's helpful for me. Just trying to get better at just structuring my thoughts as I've been trying to better curtail my own ADHD. And again, like I hope that we can make a space that feels genuinely rewarding, that feels interesting, and that can take chances. It's also not easy, and nothing worthwhile in life seems to be easy, which, no duh.